Good day, everybody. How are you all doing? Today we are going to talk about bias in studies. So here I go. So we are going to talk about bias in studies. So we will define bias and identify sources of bias. Define bias. Bias is the degree to which a procedure systematically overestimates or underestimates a population value. A study conducted by a procedure that tends to overestimate or underestimate a population value is said to be biased. That means it is heavy on one side, either on the right or on the left of the center. A study conducted by a procedure that produces the correct result on the average is said to be unbiased. Identify sources of bias. Voluntary response bias. A voluntary response survey is one in which people are invited to log on to a website, send a text message, or call a phone number in order to express their opinions. In many cases, the opinions of the people who choose to participate in such surveys do not reflect those of the population as a whole. In particular, people with strong opinions, either in support or in against of the opinion, are more likely to participate. In general, voluntary response surveys are highly biased, means heavy on one side of the center. Many advertisements contain data about the product being superior. The advertiser, however, may not report any data that tends to show that the product is inferior. Even a more seriously is a trend for companies to pay scientists or physicians to publish results involving their products or drugs. People who have a self-interest in the outcome of an experiment have an incentive to use biased methods. Self-interest, because the company has a self-interest to publicize the benefit of using their drugs, they will, uh, you know, pay doctors to conduct studies which shows the benefit of the new drugs that the companies are coming up with. Therefore, the results from this type of study, which are funded by companies, are biased. Results coming from these studies are biased because the doctor has to publish good results because the company has supported his or her research. Therefore, a company gets results which it's in favorable in its direction, and thus it or advertises these results. But it is serving the self-interest of the company to push the product, and therefore it is biased. Social acceptability bias. Consider the scenario where a pollster asks, "Did you vote in the last election?" With such a direct approach, people may be reluctant to answer no out of concern that not voting is socially less acceptable. Okay, so social acceptability bias occurs when people are reluctant to admit to behavior that reflects negatively on them. This characteristic of human nature affects many surveys. As they explained, if somebody is asked directly, "Did you vote in the last election?" Many people will say yes, although they might not have participated in the election. Why? Because it's acceptable socially to vote in an election. So this is response has a social acceptability bias in it. Leading question bias, sometimes questions are worded that suggest particular response. Consider these questions. Do you favor decreasing the heavy tax burden on middle class family? So notice this question is worded with decreasing, and then it says heavy tax burden. So people already are led into the conclusion that the tax burden is heavy. Therefore, their answer will be yes. The words heavy and burden suggest that taxes are too high and encourage a yes response. This is an example of a leading question bias. Non-response bias. People cannot be forced to answer questions or to participate in a study. A certain proportion of people who are asked to participate refuse to do so. These people are called non-responders. The opinions of non-responders may differ from the opinions of those who do respond. As a result, surveys with many non-responders are often biased because you have not collected the responses of people who did not respond. Sampling bias may occur when some members of the population are more likely to be included in the sample than others. For example, consumer surveys are often conducted by randomly people calling people from a list of phone numbers. Because consumers without a phone number will be omitted from the sample, sampling bias is likely to occur. It is almost impossible to avoid sampling bias completely. Okay. More than one bias. It is important to note that there may be more than one type of bias. Consider the following questions to parents of school children where only 30% responded. 70% did not respond. A majority did not respond. Do you support improving public schools by issuing school bonds? This example exhibits sampling bias because parents of school children may be more likely to support increased spending on schools. However, there is also leading questions bias because the question is worded to suggest a positive response. Finally, there is non response bias because only 30% of those sampled responded to the question. So, in this example, they're showing us that a question might have several types of bias: leading question bias, then sampling bias, okay, and finally non-response bias. A big sample size does not make up for bias. A sample is useful only if it is drawn by a method that is likely to represent the population well. If we use a biased method to draw a sample, then drawing a big sample does not help. For example, voluntary response surveys often draw several 100,000 people to participate. Although this sample is large, it is unlikely to represent the population well, so the results are meaningless. Remember, voluntary response sample people out of their own will participate in the survey. Who are the people who participate in this kind of survey when they have to call in a number or write an email? Are the people who are strongly either in support of the opinion or against the opinion. So voluntary response surveys have bias built in. Check for your understanding. 80,000 people attended a professional football game, filled out surveys asking their opinions on using tax money to upgrade the football stadium. 70% said that they supported the use of tax money. Then a pollster surveyed a simple random sample of 500 voters, and only 30% of the voters in this sample supported the use of tax money. The owner of the football team claims that the survey done at the football stadium is more reliable because the sample size was much larger. Easy, right? Think for a minute. Who are the people who responded in a survey at the football stadium? The people who are diehard fans of the football team who went to see the game. Therefore, they will definitely want taxpayers' money bill to update the stadium. No, the sample taken at the football stadium is biased because football fans are more likely to be sampled than others. The fact that the sample is big or large doesn't make it any better. A polling organization placed telephone calls to 1,000 people in a certain city to ask them whether they favor a tax increase to build a new school. 200 people answered the phone and 150 of them opposed the tax. Can you consider that the majority of people in the city oppose the tax, or is it likely the result is due to bias? There are several bias. Only 200 people out of 1,000 responded. Okay, that's a big non-response bias. There is a high degree of non-response bias in this sample. Okay, so these are the things we discussed about: voluntary response bias, self-interest bias, social acceptability bias, leading question bias, non-response bias, and sampling bias. So I will stop here today. If you have any comment, please write me a comment. I will respond to each and every comment. If you have a question, please go ahead and ask me a question. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you like this video, share with your friends. You and your friends, please subscribe to my channel by hitting the red subscribe button at the bottom right corner and let YouTube know that you'd like to be notified every time I upload a new video, which I do almost every day. Uh, Please do not forget to watch me tomorrow when I'll be back with another interesting topic. Thanks for watching. Take care. Have a nice day. See you next time.